This is Extra Paycheck Podcast, episode number 19.
You're listening to Extra Paycheck Podcast, where you will learn how to build and grow your own successful online business. Now, here's your host, Alex Soul.
Welcome to yet another episode of Extra Paycheck Podcast. This is episode number 19, and today's guest is Jeff Steinmann, the creator of How to Quit Working. If you ever wanted to change your life, start your own business, and leave your 9-to-5, then this episode is for you. Enjoy today's episode. Hi, Jeff. Welcome to the Extra Paycheck Podcast.
Alex, thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Jeff, tell me more about yourself, your story, and your business. What is that exactly that you do?
Oh, my story. Well, it's a long one. I hope this is a 3.5-hour podcast.
No worries about that. Go ahead.
All right, so I'll have to abbreviate a little bit. You know, I think all of us grow up thinking that there's this pattern or there's this formula that we're supposed to follow in life, and there's a lot of things to that pattern or that formula. But the key part that I'll talk about here is this whole idea that when we finish high school, we're supposed to go off to college, spend more money than we've ever spent in our life in one place at one time, and figure out exactly what we want to do for somebody else for the rest of our lives. And, that formula didn't work for me. I went to college and I bounced around from major to major, couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. Eventually, it was the late 90s, and I had been kind of banging away at this college thing for 7 or 8 years, and I had to make some money. It was a time where it was like, all right, you got to do something here. So I got really lucky, and then I kind of was interested in computers a little bit, so I went and got a job as a computer programmer, which if anybody remembers the late 90s here in the U.S., it was great because all you had to do is pick up a programming book and you could go get a pretty good paying job. And that's basically what I did, but I worked my way up through the ranks. I eventually ended up managing large projects and programs for the largest bank in the U.S., and learned a lot, and it was a great experience. But there was this one day I was managing a really large merger project, because if you're familiar with the banking industry, you know that most of what the banks are doing is merging, right? That's such a huge aspect of the business. And I was managing this large project and was meeting with senior management. I spent a lot of time talking to folks in very senior levels of the organization, which was really an interesting learning experience, and also caused me to have this particular experience that I'm about to tell you about that was very transformational. I was sitting in this meeting, and as you know, in technology, when some piece of software goes down or something bad happens, everybody's smartphone starts to go off and starts to buzz, and everybody has to snap into action to get it fixed. And there was the senior manager who was sitting in his office having a meeting about our project. I don't remember what we were talking about. It doesn't really matter. But we're having this meeting, and his phone goes off because some serious thing had gone on, unrelated to anything I was working on. And he looked down at his phone, and he let off this string of profanity that, I can have a pretty bad potty mouth myself, but it kind of made me blush. And at that moment, I kind of sat there and I said, if I continue on this path that I'm on, because I was doing all the right things. I was managing large projects. Each assignment was bigger than the previous. I was working my way up the ladder. What I realized in that moment was that was what I was working my way up to. I was working my way to being in that situation and having to deal with all of that stuff. And one of the things that I noticed in the corporate world was every time you move up a rung on the ladder, what you end up with is you go out and you have a nice bottle of wine and a steak dinner to celebrate, and then you go back the next day to more of the stuff that you didn't like in the first place. And when I had this experience in the meeting and realized that it just validated what I'd already seen, which was that's not what I'm looking for. That's not what I'm looking for. And here was the really crazy thing about this guy, this senior manager that I was meeting with. He was a week and a half from retirement. And this was the kind of the mind state that he was in. And that's when I said, I got to get serious about doing something different with my life. I've been, at that time, I had been kind of fiddling around with this and that and listening to podcasts and reading books, but I said, it is time to really get serious about doing something different with my life, because this is just not what I want. And I began dabbling in real estate. I also began a business, a marketing consulting business. And in, let's see, I'm drawing a blank. It was April of 2012. I left that job forever and never looked back. And about a year later, one of the great things about having my own business and having more freedom was it kind of opened me up to pursue some other things that I was interested in. And one of those things was writing a book. So I wrote this book, ended up calling it How to Quit Working. And kind of everything else has melted away. And my business has all become about this idea of quitting your job and starting a business and helping people to get past the fear and the roadblocks and all of the hurdles that stand between them in that job and starting a business and an amazing life that they love. So that's sort of the my story and how it dovetails into my business and what I do today.
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting story, and I think many of us entrepreneurs, I want to say, went through maybe not the similar story, but the similar part, meaning either going to school or not going to school. That's already a hard decision, first of all, if you're not made for that, let's say, right? If you feel that it's not for you, and you feel this pressure, and that's just everyone's telling you, yeah, but that's not normal that you don't want to go to college. You're supposed to.
You're supposed to. That's the plan. That's the formula. That's the blueprint.
Yeah, and a lot of people go to that, and I know a lot of people that started just like you did, meaning starting this vicious circle of different programs and minors and majors and not knowing where to go. And I know some people that are still in that loop after 4 or 5 years.
Yeah,
they can't even select a degree because they just don't know what they like, but they have to do it. And once you've done all your prerequisites or basic courses, you're kind of forced to just go with something. Yeah. So you could end up becoming I don't want to say lawyer, but something like an accountant when you completely hate math and numbers. Sure. And people, yeah. Right? But you end up doing it because, the pay is good and, you're almost there. So, and then you're miserable all your life unless you decide to take a different path. And once again, I've mentioned it in my other episodes. I don't want to discourage people from quitting school. Once you're in it, might as well finish it. But I also don't agree with the fact that you're supposed to. If that's what you want and that's what you like, go for it. School has its own benefits and lots of them. But if you don't feel like it's your thing, you shouldn't be forcing yourself to something like that, especially in the U.S. with the costs involved with higher education. It's incredibly expensive. I know for us in Quebec, in Canada, it's not that bad, actually. It's a fraction of what you guys paid in the U.S., so it's easier to make the decision.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the U.S., the cost of education has far exceeded the benefits. And the only reason why universities and colleges still exist in the U.S. for the most part is because people just haven't caught on, right? It's culturally, and you can tell me if this is the same in Canada. I believe it is, but it's culturally and societally, I guess, it's a mark of achievement, and it's a mark of intelligence, and it's a mark of accomplishment to go to college. So we continue to do it for the wrong reason, not because it's effective or because it actually helps you in your job or your career, but because it's sort of a social norm and something that we socially feel like we need. And one of the really key issues that exists with college, I mean, besides the fact that there's just a bubble in education and it's just a matter of time before it bursts, is that there's this whole idea that you're supposed to be able to figure out what you want to do before you go to college and then learn how to do it and then go out and see if anybody will hire you to do it, and by the way, if you like it, although that culturally doesn't really matter, sadly. But as human beings, we don't figure anything about ourselves out until we do things. There is no way to figure out what you want to do without doing some things, right? And there's a whole lot of things that we could do very differently when we raise children that would help them to be better able to figure out what they want to do when they grow up. But we've got a system that unfortunately just makes you just sort of throw darts at a list of majors and figure out what you want to do. And it just doesn't work. And it's time to change that. And I think that the key to changing that is to teach kids how to be entrepreneurs, teach kids how to fend for themselves, and teach kids how to start a business from a very young age. Because the fact of the matter is, it's really not rocket science. Starting a business is not that difficult. It is something that, however, requires you to think differently than we are brought up and trained to think. And that's what we have to change in this country. Well, and it's not just in the U.S. It's all over the world. I mean, I talk to people on my podcast. We've had, tons of Canadian guests and guests from Europe and Australia, basically anywhere that people speak English. We've had guests from, because it's the only language I speak. That's the only barrier that we have, is the English language. But I've never heard anybody say, no, Jeff, it's different in my country. It is the same all over the world, from what I've been able to see from my anecdotal, observations.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would like to give you one precise example.
Yeah.
I met this entrepreneur while traveling in Ukraine in 2014, and he visited me in Canada actually after that. And, so he's this young guy from Ukraine who finished university and actually worked as a lawyer at a law firm, at a local law firm there. And he didn't like it. He hated it. Mm-hmm. And Ukraine is one of the countries that's really, like you said, the society norm that you need to go to school and get your higher education, right?
Yeah.
In the US. Well, take Ukraine and multiply that by 10, that mentality.
Yeah.
It's like you really must. If you didn't go to school, people won't even look at you pretty much.
Really?
So, yeah, it's really, really important social norm for them.
Interesting.
And what he did after, I don't know how long, maybe a few years of working as a lawyer, he quit his job. He started a blog and he just started traveling the world, And that's what he's doing now. He's been doing that for, I think, 3 or 4 years, and his business is growing. He's mostly blogging about, he's actually blogging about what he's doing. He's blogging about traveling, and he's blogging about setting up your life in such a way that you free up time and you could actually, do what you want to do in life without being stuck, without being chained to an office chair or something, to a desk, And I like seeing that he's making this, he's creating this huge movement of same kind of mentality in his own country, which is not normal. For them, it's really not normal. Like, seriously, you're going to quit your lawyer job and become a online entrepreneur? It just doesn't make sense to people. However, when they hear that he makes probably 5 to 10 times more money blogging as a lawyer in that country, they're like, oh, okay, that could be interesting. But see, like, people still don't get it. Just saying that and kind of saying, I'll do something different, I'll do something that most people are not doing, people don't want to accept it for some reason. And they say, yeah, but school is safe. Yeah, but a job is safe,
Say, and I always say safe with quotes, because if you think that your job is safe, maybe you should talk to a few of the people who are unemployed and see how safe they think that a job is, right? I mean, because when the interesting thing, and I talk about this in my book, and I think it's such an interesting topic that we don't talk about, right or wrong. I don't want to get into the politics of it or the morality of it, but it's a fact. A corporation, if you work for a corporation's number one goal, and this is not for any other reason that in the U.S., this is by law. A corporation's number one goal is to make money for its shareholders. That is the structure. That is the way that the corporate law. I'm not a lawyer, but I do understand basically how corporate law works, and that is their number one goal. They have to make money for the shareholders, and not keep people employed. That is not something that they are legally obligated or required to do. And it's the same if you work for a not-for-profit. A not-for-profit is chartered to, and by law has to serve its population that it is chartered to serve, whether that's homeless children or battered women or whatever it is. So as an employee, you're never, and I don't care if the companies say that they care about their employees. Many of them do, but the reality of it is you're just never going to be in a favorable place on that food chain. The only way that you can be in a favorable place on the quote unquote food chain of a business is to own it. That's it, right? And And we don't need to rely on corporations as heavily as we do to support us and to provide our health insurance and to provide the money that we need to live our lives on a daily basis. Because if you look back to in the U.S., the late 1800s, early 1900s, but really pre-World War II, you'd see that much larger percentage, and I haven't been able to find a stat, but a much larger percentage of the population were entrepreneurs, right? Because like in my neighborhood here, we would have had a shoe repair shop on the corner, and we would have had a bakery on the corner, and we would have had all of these little businesses around the neighborhood that we would walk to, right? Because cars weren't as prevalent. Now we have cars, so we drive to the big supermarket at the end of the street, and we have fewer of the entrepreneurs. Now we're also seeing a really amazing movement in the world where, I should say, at least in the U.S., where we're more interested in small business, right? We like to patronize small businesses, and we like to be able to walk places. We like to be able to to know the people that are providing our food or providing the services that we're consuming. So that's a great trend, and that's a great trend to jump onto right now. And it makes it a really great time to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's very interesting what you just said, and I've noticed it. Kind of moving to a new neighborhood right now in Montreal, and in that neighborhood, I've noticed they have this like long street, right, with a whole bunch of small businesses, small restaurants, small cafes, and people don't want to drive to the big mall where you could find all of those things together, right? Yeah. People stay in their neighborhood and they walk to all of those businesses. And, this is something that you just mentioned, and I haven't actually thought of that until you said it out loud, right? And now I'm thinking about it. I'm like, that is, I guess it's true as well in Canada, or at least in Montreal. And I hear and I see more and more people that they say that they want to support local businesses. They want to support small businesses, made here or distributed here, whatever. But I mean, we had what was it, Target that came to Canada a few years ago.
I remember reading about that. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't have Target. We had Zellers, which was bought out by Target maybe, I don't know how many years ago, like 4 or 5 years ago, maybe a bit more. And last year, Target shut down. They closed all operations in Canada.
Wow.
Future Shop closed all operations in Canada. And there's this huge, like, stores they're shutting down for many different reasons. And I think the small businesses is actually one of them. There are more and more entrepreneurs, and I think it's easier to get financing and grants of some sorts. And people are kind of, starting small businesses and trying to make the difference, at least in their neighborhood. Yeah. And well, anyway, we're getting way too far on that subject. But yeah,
it's good stuff though.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting. And you just mentioned something. You mentioned the book. You have a book?
Yep.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, it's called How to Quit Working. And it really, I told my story of kind of how I got the inspiration to leave the corporate world and how I did so. But one of the things that the book is based upon is that wasn't my first try, right? I had made another try at entrepreneurship back in the early 2000s, and it was a complete and utter failure. What actually had happened was I had this business idea, and I thought that it was going to be an amazing thing. And I did some research, and I had gotten some things, and I say this in air quotes, figured out, because like in retrospect, I know that I didn't really have anything figured out. But yeah. I was so serious about it that I actually made an appointment with my boss to resign. And I remember the meeting kind of like it was yesterday. And what had happened was it was 8 o'clock on a Thursday morning, and I had gotten into the office a little bit early, and the meeting was in a conference room. And I went into the conference room and I sat down. My boss was running a few minutes late, and he finally gets in there and he sits down and he kind of looks at me with this sort of impatient look. He's kind of like, all right, get to the point. I got a million things to do today. I just want to get this meeting over with. He didn't say that, but that's kind of what he meant. And I was sitting there, and I had been up the entire night before thinking about this business and will it work and can I make this successful and all those things that we think about. And as I was sitting there knowing that this was my chance, this was when I had to make the decision, I completely chickened out. I just sort of made up some other silly reason for why I'd asked for the meeting. And the meeting was over really quickly, and I went back to my desk and I sat down and I thought to myself, well, I guess you're not going to do this. And sort of to comfort myself a little bit, I said, well, it's okay. You can retire in like 45 years. I was in my mid-20s at the time. And that was really the point at which I gave up. It was probably the lowest point in my entrepreneurial career because I really didn't think that I had what it took. And the book is really about the difference between that experience and when I successfully quit my job. What are the things that I did differently that second time? And I know that a lot of folks are in that situation where they're just thinking, yeah, I want to do this, but I just don't know how it's going to work. How am I going to handle the money stuff? How am I going to get customers? How am I going to get the money that I need to start the business? What if it doesn't work? What if nobody buys from me? What if nobody wants this product or service? All of these things that run through your head, and it's all about kind of what's the difference between being in that place and being in the place of success where you are able to just completely be successful, quit your job and start a business and create an amazing life for yourself.
Yeah, totally. And Jeff, tell me, the first time around when you wanted to quit your job and it didn't work out for you, did you have a business in mind? Did you actually start some kind of business? Did you take steps forward starting a business? Or did you just think, I'll quit and then I'll start something?
Well, I had a business idea, and it was so it was the early, and I emphasize idea. All I had was an idea. That's part of the problem. But the idea was that it was the early 90s, and if any small business wanted to get online and they wanted to sell their products and services online, it was practically an insurmountable task for them, right? I mean, you would have had to have hired tens of thousands of dollars worth of computer programmers, and you'd have had to buy your own servers and have your own internet connectivity. I mean, it's just ridiculous to think of say a small clothing shop on the corner to be able to start a business or to do business online. And I said, you know what? I've been working in the technology field and I kind of understand what it takes to make this happen. I think there's a way that I could put this infrastructure in place once and then let other people use it, very much like what Shopify does today. And that was my idea. And I have no idea if it would have worked or not, because one of the things that I did not do that was a huge mistake was I did not go out and test the market. I didn't go out and knock on any doors and find out if this was something that people would be interested in. And so that was the idea. It was an idea that maybe I would have had the next Shopify or the first Shopify, I should say, or maybe it would have failed completely. Maybe it was ahead of its time. Nobody knows, and I don't know because I didn't go out there and I didn't do the market research that I needed to do beforehand. And that's one of the things we talk a lot about in the book is, everybody has to make their own decision as to when it is time to quit their job. But everybody should have, unless you have like some giant pile of cash in the bank, which that's the case, that actually brings about its own problems in and of itself. But, everybody should have an idea identified and validated, and you should have customers lined up at your door before you quit your job. And that's really what we talk about in the book is how do you get customers lined up at your door? Right? If you're sitting out there thinking, okay, I'd love to quit my job, but I'm worried about this and I'm worried about this and I'm worried about that. Think about all those things you're worried about. Well, how would you feel differently about that if you actually had those customers lined up at your door and ready to buy the product or service that you wanted? Be a whole different story, right?
Yeah, totally. And there's this abbreviation that we hear a lot about these days. It's MVP. I don't know if you've heard of this one.
No, I haven't.
MVP stands for minimum viable product. Yeah. So for the listeners, this was what I think Jeff kind of meant, that you could actually build, let's say if you want to sell a software of some sort, you could build a very, very, very basic version for very, very cheap and see if there's interest for that. You're basically building it or offering a service or a product of some sort, a really basic version of it, to see if people are interested in what it is, basically to showcase it. Like, here is the idea, here's how it's going to work. Of course, you upsell all the future benefits and so on. And I've seen many businesses, especially when it comes to software and online services, I've seen a lot of new entrepreneurs not even having the MVP. They basically sell the idea of the product or the service. They do a big pre-sale. Let's say they're going to sell $1,000 software, but they're selling it for only $100 and only for the next 100 orders, right?
Yep.
And if you're able to sell that much, but I mean, not that much, you have to do research in your own industry and depending on what you sell. But, if you could make certain amount of sales and people's eyes light up and they're happy to throw their money at you, they're like, yes, I want it, give it to me, here's the money. I don't even care that it doesn't exist yet. Just give it to me and I want it right now. Then, yeah, maybe it's a good idea to quit your job and concentrate on that because there is a demand. But yeah, like you just mentioned, you need to have an idea already of something that you want to do, and you should do your market research and make sure that people actually want it. And people could read on a lot of that in your book, How to Quit Working, right?
Absolutely. We talk a lot about that.
Okay, that's great. I hope some people are going to run to buy that book from you, because this is really interesting stuff, and it's really helpful for many people especially who haven't done anything on their own, right? And they want that push, they want that something to motivate them. I think that would be a great point to start that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what the book is for. It's to motivate you and to give you the basic ideas and concepts that you need to be successful in that transition.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I would also like to mention, this just came to my head, that was from, I think, Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek. At some point, he mentioned that him or someone else was doing kind of a market research, basically asking all the friends, like, I have this product in mind, it's going to do that and that. Like, would you be interested in buying it, right?
Yeah.
And all his friends and family, of course, they want to support him. So like, yeah, this sounds amazing. Like, I would love to have it. And he's like, that's not market research. He's like, that's just encouragement from your friends.
Yeah.
He's like, once they tell you, yes, I want to have it, tell them, okay, give me $40 now. I'll give you the product once it's ready.
Yeah.
And he said, if most people will not give you that money, it's because, they don't truly and honestly want it. They just want to encourage you. And, if they're not ready to part with their money, that means maybe you should do more research and figure out if that's what's really, that's something that's going to work for you.
You got to talk to strangers. And we're always told as children, don't talk to strangers. But when it comes to starting a business, you got to flip that mentality around. You got to talk to people that you don't know and throw that idea out there and see if that's something they'd be interested in. And that's a great point in that validation, by the way, takes the form of money, not words. It's money. That's what validation means. And we talk a lot about in the book about how to get that validation and how to have those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So, Jeff, how did you finally get started with your own business? How did you quit your job?
Well, I did. One of the things that it's so funny. I always say, first of all, don't do what I do. Don't do what I did. Do what I write about in the book, because that encompasses all the mistakes that I made. But I started doing a little bit of real estate on the side and made money in a couple different ways doing that. But the main thing that I did was I started a business and marketing consulting firm. So I had a company that what we would do is we would work with authors and speakers and folks who had some sort of intellectual property that they wanted to get out there and market, and we would help them with their social media and with their website and all the kind of stuff that they needed to really get their name out there and help them create products and services and deliver all that stuff online. And that was the thing that, granted, I screwed a lot of things up in my transition, but the one thing that I did really well was that I went out there and I pounded the pavement and I asked people who I did not know. I went out and asked strangers what they thought of this idea. And they told me that they thought it was a great idea. And I actually had people approaching me wanting help with that. before I quit my job. And that's when I said, you know what, I can't grow this or I should say, I can't grow this while I'm still working. I've got to do something, and I got to do something big. And that's when I said, okay, I know that I've got the demand there. I know that people want this, and that's when I felt confident enough to quit my job. But that was a huge learning experience for me, because that was one of the things that I really did right, and that's why everything that we do in How to Quit Working is based around this idea of go out and get validation, go out and find out what the heck people want, and then deliver that thing to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And I always get these crazy ideas in my mind, and I try to stay away from them because, there's no such a thing as too many projects, having too many interesting projects and businesses going at the same time.
Sure.
There is the problem, though, of concentration and lack of time to do all of that.
Yeah.
But, I get all the time I get some kind of idea. I'm like, I could be doing that. Like, there's a big demand for it. And sometimes I'm totally wrong, because I think there's a huge demand because I really want that thing right now and I can't find it. But then, you figure out that you start looking online and you see that there's no demand. No one else is looking for it, just you. Chances are nobody wants it. And just like you mentioned that you maybe could have became the next Shopify. I've actually had some app ideas, and I just let them go because I was thinking, well, that's not really. There's not going to be a demand for that kind of app. Who would really want it?
Yeah.
And then 2-3 years later, I see that app making headlines. That's exactly what I had in mind, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that we have to remember that as creative people, we have ideas all the time. We're constantly coming up with ideas, and it's everyone. I think everybody is creative at heart, and everybody has the ability to generate lots and lots of great ideas.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also the fact also of catching your ideas and maybe writing them down.
Yeah.
Because, I'm sure you also have like dozens, if not hundreds of ideas every day, but, you don't document them, and they never move forward also because of that. Because it's just an idea that, slips through your mind and then it's gone.
Well, and my mentality has really changed around ideas, because we've talked about the fact that an idea is just an idea. It's not a business until you go out there and create it. Well, first validate that there are people that actually want it, and then go out and create it and figure out a way to deliver it. One of the things that we see a lot in How to Quit Working is we see folks that come to us with what they believe are great ideas that they want to implement, and they want help implementing them. And the first thing that we say is, well, we have to step back and really validate this and make sure that it's a good idea. And I think that I've seen so many folks I guess I should say How to Quit Working has rescued many folks who have gone down that wrong path, or that I shouldn't say wrong, I should say ineffective path of starting with an idea. That my mentality is really, really strong around this idea thing. So when I get ideas, I kind of think to myself, that's cute, that's nice, it's fun to think about, but let's move on and let's be serious, and let's focus on the serious stuff and the stuff that actually works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. And as I mentioned, also having too many ideas is also not a good thing.
Yeah.
And an idea is just an idea.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with getting ideas and thinking about them and talking about them with your friends, as long as when it comes to starting a business, go at it the right way. There's nothing wrong with ideas. They're fun. They're fun to think about. They're fun to talk about. But just remember that if you really want to make something out of it, it's got to be derived first from what the market wants.
Yeah, of course. And Jeff, so you quit your job, you started your business, and pretty much all the entrepreneurs go through rough patches sometimes, and many of us end up at some point of time where you think this is not working out for me. This is, I'm trying to do something that's really impossible, and I thought it would be easier, and it's not. So I just should quit it and get a 9-to-5 and work for 45 years until I retire. So have you had this kind of moment when you thought, you know what, it's not for me, it's too hard, I'll just get back to a regular job?
No, everything's gone perfectly for me since day one.
Wow.
No,
Are you serious?
I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding. Yes, I have had that. Now, one thing that I will say is Honestly, I have never seriously considered getting a job. I have never seriously considered that. And I think that it's really important that your listeners and anybody who wants to be successful takes that completely off of the table. Just take getting a job off of the table. It is not an option. It is not a possibility. You're not going to do it. And what that does is it forces you to focus on creating your business. And I'd say one of the most difficult times that I had in my business was when I started that initial business and marketing consulting company. Things were going okay, and we were seeing positive growth. We were getting good feedback. But I really kind of reached this point where I was like, I just don't know if this is the kind of business that I want. And I was finding myself really frustrating, having to do a lot of stuff that I didn't enjoy. And I was like, what did I do here? Why did I created this business wrong. I've got some of these clients that just aren't the right people for me. And that was a really difficult time. And I also, at that same time, had to part ways with a business partner who was also a friend. And I say was because it was not an amicable departure. So that was a really difficult time. I would have to say that was probably one of the most difficult moments of my sort of entrepreneurial career. But it was certainly a great learning experience, and some of the best lessons that I've learned in entrepreneurship have come from that particular experience that was really difficult. But I got to say, I think one of the reasons that I have been able to stick around and persevere and build the How to Quit Working platform to the really great place that it is today. I mean, we're tracking to do 6 figures this year, which is a huge milestone for us. But I think that the thing that has helped me more than anything to be successful with that is just knowing that there's no other option. It's success in entrepreneurship or starvation. That's the way I look at it. And when you begin to look at it that way, you begin to act very differently, right? I mean, you begin to look at it from a much more kind of constructive, realistic standpoint and say, okay, that didn't work. Okay, now what do I do? Do I go get a job, or do I go and try to figure out why it didn't work? Do I go ask my customers, hey, how come you weren't interested in that? Is there something I could do to make it better? And that is when you're really able to have success, is when you just take that get a job option off of the table and roll up your sleeves and get really serious about not is it going to work, is it going to make money, are people going to buy it, but how can I make it work? How can I make it such that everybody wants to buy it? How can I ensure that it's going to make money?
This is really great, and I've actually been thinking about it recently. The same kind of mentality. What if all the jobs disappeared and you couldn't get a job to pay your bills, right? Yeah. What would you do? This is really great advice. Thank you for sharing it. And I really hope that at least some of the listeners will take it in and, start planning their entrepreneurial journey, or at least thinking about it in that way, that there's no jobs, no more jobs at all left.
Absolutely.
What do I do?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is really great. And, another thing I would like to share with the listeners, and we touched it a little bit before the recording of this episode, is when I started a lot of online businesses and a lot of websites, and many of them failed, some of them didn't. Mm-hmm. It's just the way it goes. You have to take that failure and turn it into something else and learn from it. That's the least you could do. But so many times it happened that I would just sit there and think, how come it's not working out so well for me? Or to be more precise, let's say there's a project that I'm starting and there's a similar project that someone else did and they're making $1 million a year, and I'm like, well, I started that and it didn't go anywhere. I didn't make any money at all. And it happened many times for many different projects, and I would always try to understand how come they're succeeding with it and I'm not. And why I'm saying that we touched that conversation a little bit before the podcast is what I figured out later on, that it was consistency. When I stopped looking at what those other people are saying, the people that are succeeding, right? I stopped looking at what they're saying and I started looking at what they're doing. And one really, really common trait that I found in many of them was the consistency. People would just stick to it and keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And as you just mentioned, if it's not working out, find out why it's not working out. Maybe you're pushing it for the wrong reason, or maybe you're pushing it in the wrong direction. But you have to try to find out what's going on, and you have to keep working. You can't just give up. Well, that's what I think. You can't just give up and go get a job again, especially when it's not an option, like we just talked about, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you just got to be committed to the result. You think about a lot of the things in our lives, and I know you have listeners out there who are parents, right? And that's an example of this mentality, right? When the going gets tough with your kids, you don't just think, well, I'm just going to give up. Yeah, I mean, and you can have that same dedication with your business. And one of the things that I always tell people with kids is what our parents do and the examples that they show us very much reflect what we do. And I think that if you're out there and you have kids, you're a parent and you are working a job that you don't enjoy, and you're doing something that is just sucking the life out of you on a day-to-day basis, I think you have to ask yourself, is that the life that you want for your kids? Because the reality of it is, and I'm not an expert on parenting, but what I do know is that parents are the biggest example that kids have. They're the people that they see every day. Every single day they see you coming home from work exasperated and frustrated and not wanting to get up and go in the next day. And the question I think you have to ask yourself is that the life that you want for your kids? Because they're going to follow your example. So if that's any motivation to quit your job and start a business, I mean, I don't know what better motivation there is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. And I've seen it. I see it happening around me to all my friends. And I grew up around people that always told me, once again, same things. You're supposed to go to school, you're supposed to get a job, and you're supposed to work from morning until night until you retire, right? All your life.
Yeah.
And that was actually the majority of my mentality as well. I would always look for jobs when I was younger. Even when I was like 15 years old, I found this little company that would sell ice cream on the streets of Montreal, of course. But yeah, you're a kid and you're making some good money, so I was happy, right?
Sure.
But then but see, even that, most of the kids at my age, they would try to buy beer at some store that might sell to the underage kids, or they would go skateboarding or something. And I was always trying to make some money because I would be like, okay, I'm going to I'm in high school, right? And I really didn't want to ask my parents for money because, as I mentioned, that mentality of money is really hard to get. You have to work really hard for it, and you must be working. So I didn't want to ask them for money. I always thought that I should make my own money. Anyway, the point is that my dad is a real hustler.
Oh, cool.
He would always find ways to make money, and my dad was born and raised in the USSR days and in the Soviet Ukraine.
Yeah.
Which is also not normal for them to have the mentality of hustling. It was actually illegal for many years to buy something and resell it for profit. You just couldn't do it. But he would always find ways to do it, and he would find little contracts of this and that on the side and, buy things, sell things. And I think because of him, he never told me that this is how the life should be, right? Mm-hmm. But I kept seeing him do this kind of stuff, and I guess it kind of stayed in my mentality somewhere in my subconscious, and this is, I think, what pushed me eventually to start my own entrepreneurial journey, because I knew that, well, you don't really have to, to get a job. There are different things you could do and make better money that you could do at a job, and you could work different hours and you could make your own schedule, which is, I think, well, to me, is one of the most important things about working online. And once again, I've given this advice before, and I would like to share it again. When you work for yourself, when you're an entrepreneur, it does not mean that you will be working 1 hour per month and then you'll just enjoy, all the activities and a whole bunch of money coming from nowhere. No, you will have to work a lot, especially if you want to achieve great success. You'll have to really work a lot, especially at the beginning. However, the big difference is that you are kind of the person who decides on your schedule, on your vacations, on your time off, your time on, and I think to me this is crucial because I like traveling and I like meeting friends and riding my motorcycle, and I don't want to ask somebody to let me go for a bike ride or to go for a weekend to another city or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm the one who decides on that. However, I do agree that I work a lot as well. It doesn't fall from the sky, the money or the success or that. Not even all of that. I mean the actual the ability to do that, to control your time and to control your vacations and everything, doesn't just appear out of nowhere. I have to work hard to get that. It just, I work it on my own terms. I guess that's the point. I do it on my own terms.
Absolutely. And I've never met anybody who has had success as an entrepreneur who said, you know what, it's not worth it. I wish I just would have worked a job. I've never met that person yet.
That's a good point. Maybe we should try to find one. Who knows?
I'm sure there's somebody out there, but I think that most folks realize that, once you begin to kind of just take control of your life and be able to do things on your own terms, it's hard to get away from that.
Yeah, it's really,
and you
really
begin
hard.
to take it for granted.
Yeah. See, even for me, I think, honestly, I say it to people and people get surprised when I say it out loud, but this is honestly how I feel, and I really don't see myself ever getting a job. I just don't, I don't understand how it would ever be possible.
I'd lose my mind. I don't think it's possible for me anymore.
Yeah, you would always find a way to make it happen, to make ends meet without getting a 9-to-5.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure. All right, Jeff. So we're getting to the end of the podcast, and there are a few more things I wanted to ask you, 2 more questions. One of them being, what would be your most important advice to a beginner entrepreneur or entrepreneur, as we call them, someone who hasn't started yet and who's just thinking about starting something of their own?
Quit being afraid. Flip your mentality around from I'm afraid it's not going to work. I'm afraid I'm not going to make money. I'm afraid nobody's going to buy this. And start thinking in terms of I'm going to make it work. If this thing doesn't work, I'm going to change it. I'm going to adapt it. I'm going to figure out how to make it work. And that is the only way I know of to get past that fear. And you also have to put regular practices in place like meditation that get you to stop with all of the thinking of and the worry and the fear and then this isn't going to work and nobody's going to buy this and who am I and all of that kind of stuff. You got to get the rituals in place and you got to flip your mentality around from the worry and the fear and the concern and flip it around to spending all of that energy focusing on how are you going to make it work? How are you going to make it work? You change it, do whatever you got to do to make it work until it works.
Great advice. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, fear is something that we have to battle on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And that's something to overcome. And I think it's, once again, thank you. And I think this is really, really great and important advice for everyone who wants to start something different, who wants to change their life. If you're not scared of it, then maybe it's not even worth doing, right?
That's a good point. Yeah. If it's not scary, then it's obviously inside your comfort zone, and that's not going to produce any kind of a real big result.
There you go. All right, Jeff. So before we end this episode, I would like you to share ways for people to find out more about you, about what you do, about your book, about your podcast, about how to quit working, and how to get in touch with you as well. So go ahead.
Yeah, everything is over at howtoquitworking.com. If you go to howtoquitworking.com and click on the book link, you will be taken over to a place where you can purchase the book with a whole bunch of bonuses. You can also buy it on Amazon at amazon.com. Just search for How to Quit Working. It'll pop right up. The podcast and everything else, that's all at howtoquitworking.com. And feel free to email me at jeff@howtoquitworking.com. howtoquitworking.com. We also have an 800 number, and that's 877-841-0201. Again, 877-841-0201. Give us a call. If something that we talked about here today resonated with you, give us a call and we'll talk about how we may be able to help you.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really enjoyed recording this episode, and I really enjoyed the chat, all your advice and your tips and your story.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Extra Paycheck Podcast. As usual, I will be putting up a show notes page at extrapodcast.com/19. This is where I'll be sharing Jeff's information and other resources we covered in today's episode. If you haven't already, you can subscribe to the show through iTunes. Simply go to extrapodcast.com/iTunes. This is also where you'll be able to rate the show and to leave a review, which will help tremendously. Thank you so much for listening once again, and I'll talk to you next Monday.